introduce yourself to the
welcome. How many
broader
people we
group.
got in the
Yeah,
room?
Leo.
we have 26 folks in the room.
Oh, that feels good.
Hello,
So,
everyone.
good morning,
Welcome.
good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming in from the world. I hope you can hear me okay. Due to some technical difficulties and my current restrictions of being in prison at the moment, I do not have a coffee shop that I can go to make sure that I'm on so that you can see my wonderful face. So, thank you each for making time today, and it is truly my honor and my pleasure to be able to introduce Melinda Salazar. I've been working with her now for a couple of years. I am on the advisory council of the Truth Telling Project that rose up in the aftermath of the police killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And Melinda is a co-executive director and just an amazing human being who, relevant to the work today, we've been partnering in supporting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission out in Iowa City. And it is such layered and nuanced work. And when we're talking about truth-telling and we're talking about healing and reconciliation, we're also talking about racial trauma intergenerationally, transgenerationally felt in our bodies and expressed between us in ways that are just really heavy to carry. And so I've done a lot of learning this journey with Melinda and with Eduardo and Dave and the whole Think Peace team. And it has been a blessing, just a really rich learning opportunity for me, where I've been able to grow and come into my own in this space. And so I welcome Melinda as our panelist representing this work and speaking to one of the main documents that we created, which is a trauma-informed truth-telling and witnessing protocol on how to hold truth-telling hearings well and do so in a trauma-informed manner. And so, without further ado, I will welcome Melinda with a whole lot of gratitude for the lessons that you have taught me, for the partnership that we have been in, and just for the amazing ways that you show up in the world. And I really hope that this is an event, a gathering, a space of connection and learning and co-creation of wisdom as they are whenever you're involved. And so thank you, Deborah, for stepping up in my stead to facilitate. Thank you for allowing me to help frame this session.
Thank you, Leo. Melinda, before we turn it over to you, I just want to formally welcome everyone. We have, as Leo mentioned, had a few technical difficulties, and I'm very pleased that we were still able to be joined by Leo Hilton, current PhD student at George Mason University, as well as member of Think Peace Learning and Support Hub and the Carter School Working Group on Forgiveness and Reconciliation. I am Deborah. I am the Associate Director of the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation. And Dr. Melinda Salazar will now introduce herself and her work at the Truth Telling Project. So over to you, Melinda, and thank you again, Leo.
I'm sorry, I missed, were you calling me or were you speaking? I missed a little bit of that while I was trying to get my hearing things going, organized.
Oh, good. No, I just welcomed you. If you'd like to share a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, great. Thank you. It is an honor to be here with you all. I have some very old history going with George Mason, and the peace work. Long ago, George Mason was a home for COPRA, the Consortium on Peace Research, Education, and Development, before it became the Peace and Justice Program. And I had the great opportunity of presenting my work. This is quite long ago. My work with Dr. Elise Boulding, who pioneered imaging for a peaceful future. And her work, as it was spiritually informed, as a woman and as a scholar in the emerging fields of women's studies, gender and women's studies, peace studies, and future studies. So the world has changed quite a bit. Elise Boulding is no longer with us, and I wonder what she would have to say based on where we are right now. I have in front of me the questions that you posed, and let me just ask you, would you like me to follow that or jump in, or how would you like me to proceed?
Yeah, so I'll make mention that, as Leo mentioned, he is currently incarcerated at Maine State Prison, and therefore his phone has some restrictions. So at any point in time, we may lose him. But Leo, I welcome in the meantime for you to join in and facilitate with Melinda. Otherwise, I'm happy to take it away. You know what you think.
I have prepared some words that I believe I'm going to address the questions that you have presented, and let me just get organized here.
Yeah, Melinda, take it wherever you want to take it.
Okay, I'm going to take
That's
it wherever I
beautiful.
want to take it. All right, here we go. And you can hear me okay, correct?
Thank you.
Okay.
Beautiful, yes.
All right. So, oh, where did that go? Okay. So in the wake of the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police and calls for actions from protesters and residents in Iowa City, Iowa, the Iowa City Council drafted a resolution to create an ad hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission to bear witness to the truth of racial injustice in their community and to carry out restorative justice through the collection of testimony and public hearings, with the purpose of the TRC's recommendation to the council to plan and to dedicate and or rename public spaces or rights of way in honor of Black Lives Matters movement, and to impact policy and social change. That was the original thought. And I'm going to summarize really briefly an overview, and then I might take it in a very different direction. So here we go. So in brief, the Truth and Reconciliation was a 3-year process to date, experienced by many fits and starts, some of which can be attributed to entrenched generational, racial, and class divides within the community, the inherent challenges centering a Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a committee of the municipality, and all that, and demands for all consultation to be held in public and to prohibit or limit informal communication, as well as a lack of resources to support volunteer commissioners. At this time, within end of March, beginning of April, the work of the facilitators, which included 4 different community-based groups, a quantitative fact-finding partner, and the Think Peace Learning and Support Hub, the work of the facilitators are now coming to a close, and the final report is going to be submitted to the City Council by the facilitator shortly. So the original intent of this presentation, as it was initially designed some weeks ago, was to solely talk about trauma-informed approaches to truth-telling. So while I am going to do that, I also want to take this conversation a step deeper to talk about the concept of wounded leaders and wounded leadership. So we included a section and when I say we, Leo and I, and with a shout out and deep appreciation to Leo, we included a section in a truth-telling and witnessing document on trauma-informed approaches. We said, and I'll quote, "An understanding of trauma, multi-generational trauma, re-traumatization in the truth-telling process, and how it impacts giving and witnessing testimony, as well as how to create spaces that are culturally sensitive, is imperative in working respectfully with Black and BIPOC communities." We reference the the origin of trauma-informed care from mental health agencies, its use in ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, adverse community environments, and other situational events that impact brain development, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, the short and long-term health issues, and in some cases, early death. We included in this document my friend and colleague, Dr. Joy DeGroo's work and what she calls post-traumatic slave syndrome, and Dr. Resmaa Menakem's approach to trauma and somatic memory locked in the body, to acknowledge specifically how members of the African American and Indigenous communities develop adaptive behaviors as a consequence of multi-generational oppression resulting from centuries of chattel slavery, forced removal from ancestral lands, immigration, colonization, and other manifestations of pervasive, it is perversive, pervasive systemic racism. What we did not include with the commissioners or between ourselves is the notion of wounded leaders and wounded leadership. I'm referring here to a policy paper published by the Global Initiative for Justice, Truth, and Reconciliation. It's not a new document. It was published in 2006. And when I came across it just the other day, I just thought that these words so aptly apply to where we are today, both in this process in Iowa City and in our own future work. And I'm going to quote the then President Cyril Ramaphosa's comment that he gave at Winnie Mandela's funeral. While he is addressing the cultural and political context in South Africa at that time, I suggest as I read this to you that we reflect on the United States as a nation. So he says, "We must also recognize our own wounds as a nation. We must acknowledge that we are a society that is hurting, damaged by our past, numbed by our present, and hesitant about our future. This may explain why we are so deeply prone to anger and violence. The concept of wounded leadership and wounded leaders underscores those of us who occupy leadership positions and work upfront and personal with others engaged in truth and justice and reconciliation work are also among those who ourselves are traumatized and may harbor unresolved trauma stemming from our past experiences, socially, within our family, and within our nation. Try as we might, believe as we do, prepared as we are, When we are put up on a pedestal in front of a truth-telling hearing, stuff happens. We can be triggered, we can react, and our unresolved trauma shows up, uninvited, but shows up nonetheless. We are unable to achieve our vision. We undermine our own effectiveness and negatively impact the communities within which we work. Nonetheless, as wounded leaders in leadership positions working in wounded communities, institutions, and societies, recommendations for addressing trauma in leadership is key to personal, family, community, and social transformation and positive change. So I am going to I have more to say, but I'm actually going to open it up to conversation. And before I do that, I do want to refer to a quote that we use often in our work. And even though we may use this work, it does not mean that we are over and beyond the impacts of trauma. Resmaa Menakem says, to heal, we must first acknowledge the truth of our collective trauma. Racism is not just a matter of individual prejudice. It is a systemic issue that affects us all. To heal, we must first acknowledge the truth of our collective trauma. And I mean that for the work we do, and I mean that for the leaders we are or hope to become. And without addressing the nature of our own trauma, we, as I said earlier, do begin to undermine our efforts. So I'm just going to pause there and see if there are any questions or any cause for discussion. I see that the document itself is in the chat. You're free to take a look at that. And I just want to say again, in addition to what we wrote, I'm taking it to another level around what it means for us when we are in these leadership positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Yes. In addition to what I hope will be a rich conversation with our participants to share, we do want you to be able to walk away with some tools. So in the chat, you will find not only the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Trauma-Informed Truth-Telling and Witnessing Protocol, but also the Truth-Telling Hearings Manual in order to hopefully inform your work as well. So with that, reflections, questions. In the meantime, Melinda, would you mind sharing a little bit about your healing journey in relation to the work that you do?
That's a good question. I'm first generation US American from Latina, from Colombia, where I have Muisca indigenous blood and from Spain. And on my paternal side, I am my father rather, is Ukrainian. So both of those places are very interesting. From the Muisca side, it is a indigenous community, pre-contact, thriving, the third largest indigenous community in South America, and the first to be conquered by the Spaniards, of which I also have blood leading to conquistadors as well. And the Ukrainian side, I need not say much about that. My grandparents and my father are Jewish Ukrainian who fled during the revolution in 1917. Did I say that year right? Yeah, 1917. And in both the trauma from all sides of my family, genetics are pretty well entrenched. Growing up as a first generation in this country, being the person of difference, the person of color in my predominantly white Christian community, essentially rendered me confused, culturally schizophrenic, invisible. And my adult life experience has been making meaning of all of that. I've spent my entire life in public education, doing work around race, gender, diversity issues, and empathizing with the experience of others who, like me, were our original language was taken away from us by the public school system, and our way of thinking, our way of processing was not acknowledged. I found my place not only in education, but also within the peace education and peace studies community, where I did work with leaders like Betty Reardon, Elise Golding, and other educators and sociologists, addressing really the way in which women engage in peacemaking. Let me just pause there for a moment. Any questions or thoughts? Anything that you'd like to, before I go on tangents?
Thank you for sharing. I will invite folks to speak to this question as well. But Melinda, in that response, I'm wondering, what is the importance of knowing your history and your heritage with regard to truth-telling work?
Yeah.
How does that come to play for you? And hopefully we'll have some folks share what that would mean for them as well.
For me, my understanding of truth and truth-telling is that it paves a path towards justice, and I understand justice as a vehicle for achieving unity amongst ourselves as members of one human family, and that unity is directly connected to our global peace and security. So those all interface with one another. Truth telling as leading the way towards justice, and justice shining a light on the movement towards the unity of the oneness of our human family, and therefore from that will come lasting peace.
Thank you. I'm sure we have some rich histories in this space. So if anybody feels comfortable sharing, I would love to hear your thoughts on the work that you do and the importance of knowing your history and heritage when it comes to truth-telling work.
Good afternoon in the US, good evening for us in Europe. In this case, me, I'm sitting in Switzerland. Danilo Dominguez, Dr. Melinda, thank you so very much for sharing your immigrant blood, your transcending to the US. Me, myself, I'm Cuban American, but sitting in Europe for quite some time. I'm currently seeking my third year, my clinical PhD in psychology in Ramon Llull Blanquena, Barcelona, Spain. And also more or less, I I can see myself a reflection on where you explain how hard it's when your voice have been silent because your language is not the language of the place you are moving in, and you are, let's say, your family or mother and father, your relative are not barely speaking the language. You struggle in the school system in the U.S. I used to work for Miami-Dade public school system, was teaching Spanish language, so I understand what's going on in the U.S. Well, at my time, long time ago. Also, I used to work for Jackson Memorial Hospital downtown Miami as a psychology. I saw a lot of immigrants, Brazilian community, on-the-score community, poor community in the southern South Florida, in the southern part of this Miami-Dade County. I totally agree with you. There's work to be done. There's work to understand. It's not about language. It's about human beings. It's about feelings, about families, about more than the language, I would say. So really, my heart goes to you because it speaks directly to my own self, to me, myself. That's why I'm a psychologist. That's why I decided to be a family therapy. That is why I work in 4 languages: Spanish, English, German, and Italian language. So it's not that easy to switch languages, but it's part of the processes. It's quite beautiful things while you've been doing it. So I researched a little bit about you, beautiful work you've been doing. And my question, I guess, is since I've been 13 years outside the US and I've seen the uprising about the division, class division, race division, and so forth and so on. How's the actually currently situation right now in the public school system in this case? Because that's what I left when I came to Europe. I'm interested to see if there have some changes arrived, because for my last time in the US in Miami, and currently Miami-Dade County Public School System is teaching Spanish as a second language, and also Creole, a mix of French-Italian language, French and Haiti language, which I find it quite attractive because that make me, the student from the US, more appealing to find places everywhere to work and to communicate. Language is the basis for many other things. It's not about only communication, it's about me enriching my own perception about society and some of the, and able to communicate as well. So enlighten me more or less what is going on, what is new. Like I said, long time ago, outside from the US. So, and not digging too much in what's going on in this public school systems at this present time.
Well, thank you for all of that. I should also tell you that I had a second mother, so to speak, an Afro-Cuban mother, who my mother provided. My parents both provided a safe place to flee Castro. My parents, full disclosure, my parents were Batista followers. And I'm speaking to you here from Puerto Rico, where my mother eventually lived. So I'm here in the Caribbean, and I send you warm welcome. My last teaching position was as the director of an elementary and secondary master's in teaching program at Western New Mexico University, Gallup Graduate Study Center, the Northwest area of New Mexico, 90 something percent Navajo and other Pueblo tribes. I left teaching about 10 or 12 years ago when the writing was clearly on the wall, and it's only become more visible that school systems are places of trauma. I think we may have known that to some extent for some people, but teaching has become, when I was in college in the 70s, I read the book, Teaching is a Subversive Activity. And I think, and I believe that I would make a difference in the world in education. And when I left teaching, I really, believe it or not, I felt like I had been in the wrong profession my whole entire life. I don't think that that's necessarily true, but because I know that I did impact people's lives. But when I think about the work that we try to bring now to public school teachers, it comes at the risk of knowing that we may be jeopardizing teachers' jobs if they begin to teach the truth and does not use curriculum. I still support and we promote all of the curriculum by Rethinking Schools or Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching for Justice, the Zen Education Center. There are plenty of amazing educational resources. And I'm well aware that educators are on troubled terrain in the classroom. So I guess that's what I have to say, and it is so politically driven in certain states. I know that there are some communities that are establishing their own truth schools outside of the public school system. And I guess that's all I got. You know, I think that I don't want to discourage anybody from educating our youth, the next generation, but just that schools have become dangerous places in some states, particularly the state that you used to teach in.
Yes, indeed. Especially in Jacksonville, the area, southern limited Georgia, Florida is quite, Orlando as well, a little bit challenging for my colleagues that I left behind. I said I left behind because many of them went to the same university, Barry University or University of Miami. So many of them, they move a little bit southern area and they struggle a lot. And also the salary are not helping none of them. So it's quite, I find it quite sad because without education, we don't know, been sitting here, and the teacher, at least in Florida, they're earning really, the wages are quite low and the cost of living quite high. So it doesn't do the math here. The salary, many of them turn into have a second job. So I find it quite sad, honestly. That's the situation going on.
I understand.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
I'll leave it open for a second, but I do see a friendly face in the audience. So in the meantime, Antti Pentikainen, Director of the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation and Co-Executive Director of Big Peace Learning and Support Hub. Antti, would you like to share any reflections or ask a question to continue the conversation with Melinda?
Yeah, thank you. And Deborah, let me know if my voice is clear. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yes.
yeah, thank you, Deborah, for those beautiful questions for Melinda already. And thank you, Melinda, for being here, as well as Leo and your collective work in terms of developing the guide. So I know, Melinda, this is a little bit of a big question, but once the commission in Iowa started, the belief we had and the intent we had was that we wanted the city to succeed, to face some of its difficult past, so that it could inspire other places to do that. And like you said, it's had some challenges here and there. I think like what I have learned previously is that like when challenges arise, there are also huge opportunities involved. Like once you deal with things of the scale, there is pain involved, and of course, often the longevity of the process is dependent on the ability to transform those situations into a positive way going forward. Anyway, the question I have for you is, looking back with all the knowledge that you have, and for the beautiful work you yourself and many others have contributed, what would you do differently? Like, what is the learning that you carry at this moment thinking about how hard this work is and looking ahead, you know, to efforts to wanting it to succeed.
I think that's a great question. And um, my first lesson learned, I'm not sure if it's a lesson learned, it's an observation. And that my first observation, knowing about the work in North Carolina by the beloved Greensboro community, the work that was done in Truth Telling Project in Ferguson, looking at what a community-based truth and reconciliation or a community-based truth-telling hearing process looks like, I think one of my biggest observations is that truth processes that are sponsored by a local municipality brings greater challenges that I've mentioned, and there are more challenges than community-based initiatives where there are not those same restrictions, both legally, resource-wise, that there is a difference in and I don't know, there have not been many municipality-based truth commissions established in the United States. So it would be hard to draw a generalization. There have been 2 very successful community-based truth-telling initiatives, including a statewide initiative in Maine, the Maine Wabanaki Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that addressed issues with the Child Welfare Act. Those have had more addressing, how do I say this, addressing the deeper issues in bringing people together to explore explore harms and creating repair than has the municipality-led initiative that gets bogged down with a lot of policies and laws that are inherent to city councils. So I guess that's my first biggest observation. My second observation about the Iowa City Truth and Reconciliation Commission is the importance of longer-term facilitation for the commissioners to have an opportunity to bond with one another, to maybe hold their own internal truth and reconciliation or their own truth-telling experiences, to become vulnerable with one another. Maybe I should say to even know one another, to build trust, to bond, and to be able to speak with a unified voice. And where does that mandate come from, if not from the municipality itself, the city council, supporting that kind of internal work first before it opens itself up to the community. So what I'm really saying in summary is if this is the way Truth and Reconciliation Commissions can proceed, lessons learned, it would be for, I'm going to say 6 months to a year for commissioners to meet by themselves outside of public meeting. And I don't know how that happens legally. I don't know if every city council, I don't know what the controls are there that do or don't make that happen, but to build themselves as a unified commission. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's amazing assessment, Melinda. Thank you for that. And I would just only kind of say that one of the wishes why Big Peace get involved in this process and put our weight and knowledge behind it was also the need to move from the truth telling into also the healing space, which of course is part of your incredible skill set. That without healing and renewing the relationships, often communities remain wounded and divided, and so just wanting also ask from that perspective, kind of what recommendations you would have for other commissions considering this process. But thank you for those observations already.
Thank you, Antti, for the questions. I think I would have to mention also the what is the goal of the commission itself, to be really clear about, well, two things. What was the commission, what was the community that the commission was established to address? In the case of Iowa City, as I said, it came out of the George Floyd protests and racial issues that existed in Iowa City. Second to that is reaching out to that community and inviting members of that community to, in a systematic way of reaching out to that community to come and to tell their stories. Iowa City is an interesting location where, and I'm guessing, I don't know. I do live when I'm not in Puerto Rico in the Northeast, and I guess I do. There's immigration communities, large immigration communities throughout the U.S. right now, and I'm only imagining, despite what comes out of this current election, the people who have come here will continue to stay here, and the causes in other nations around environment and war-torn conflict will continue to attempt to migrate into the U.S. And so I will say that the majority of the truth tellers who came forth in Iowa City were dealing with immigration issues. And so how does a community address the multiple needs for truth telling without there being competition prioritizing whose story is more important? In Iowa, because it was indigenous, because the U.S. was all indigenous land, there was a very strong component both in the facilitation team and wanting people to come forth from the various indigenous communities. And again, we have seemingly competing needs for telling a story and for policy change. And how does the city council, how does a commission address that without having to prioritize, reach out to the communities in the greatest need, and also without prioritizing whose oppression is greater? I don't know if I'm saying exactly how I want to say it. I might need to give more thought to that question, but those are my first thoughts.
Beautiful. Deborah, would there be time for a little follow-up comment?
Of course. We're going to, I would love that. I hope that this will also be a bit of a foundation for us as we move into some breakout groups to continue the conversation a bit more intimately. And then we'll come back together. So please continue.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And I would not want to distract breakouts. Melinda, one of the things that we are considering, with Deborah and Leo and the beautiful team at the MHCR, is understanding what we call healing center processes and how they change the trajectory of the repetition of the conflicts. And there are a couple of things that you really beautifully have elaborated to. One is like recognizing the imagination of those who come with the initiative, and also making sure that healing is part of their journey and leads into creativity towards what it can mean for their communities, their society. The second element, which is a mistake I have done myself when I was helping the Finnish Sami Truth Commission with our indigenous people or with indigenous people of Scandinavia move forward, is that often for a group that has been marginalized, oppressed, and harmed, to be able to move into a process and have a unified opinion what it is all about, there has to be space for internal healing within that, to be able to form an opinion and to be part of negotiations with entities, societies, or structures that have been and are still oppressing them. And then when a process starts, it requires that imagination of a healing center processes or healing as an ingredient from all of the different sides. But then I fully support your idea that for a commission to be able to succeed and make a contribution, they have to form a team. They have to learn to know what it means to do the work and what it means to share that pain in front of others. And if they're not doing that work themselves, how will they be able to carry a process forward? That will be extremely difficult. And I think you have really wise lessons to share. So I'll pause here. Thank you, Melinda.
I do want to add to that. Thank you for all of that. And I do want to say that when we do evaluation of programs, whatever the analysis is, whether it's individual or, a full program evaluation, I think that we need to look at, not frame situations as mistakes, but look at everything as a lesson learned. And I think if there are more lessons, I believe, that can be, and research points to that, not a lot, but some of the research that I've done in Latin America with NGOs, research points to there is more to learn from a quote development failure than there is to learn from a development success. And if we look at a TRC in the same frame as a development project, it's a social economic development project, or it could lead to a social economic development project. We frame it in terms of what are the lessons that we can learn. So I thank you. Those are my final comments about our work in Iowa City.
Thank you. Thank you both. Yes, any final questions for Dr. Salazar as we head out into our breakout rooms? We will stay here in the main room. So if you do want to chat for the last few minutes more one-on-one, feel free. But for now, the rooms are open, and I invite you to think through anything you'd like to share. Appreciate it.
We are aiming to transition, right? Transitional justice. We are aiming to transition from this place of racial animus, this history of racial violence, to a more healed future, engaging in racial justice, right? That is the action that needs to be taken, democratic, holistically inclusive of those who have been marginalized and excluded from these conversations, to co-create more healed, more racially healed future. But in order for us to get from where we are to that future, we need these transitional justice mechanisms spaces of trauma-informed truth-telling, witnessing, in order to facilitate the type of air. Right? We need to let air in on this wound in order for it to begin to heal. Because so long as we keep it covered, it continues to fester, erupt from time to time, violence and in public protest. So in order for us to move into this more healed future, we need to reckon with the violence that exists, honor the fact that it comes in a long history, a long lineage of violence, and work towards coming together with radical inclusion, regardless of race, gender, skin color, ethnicity, any other social construct that we want to pull into this, to bring the people together, hear the voices of those most directly impacted, to guide the solutions, to transform these systems in order to bring about that future that we need. And that requires internal healing as well as external healing. So with that, I want to honor that we are coming up close to time and pass it over to you, Deborah, to bring us to a close.
Thank you for those beautiful words, Leo. You will not be surprised when I say I have tears in my eyes. Really appreciate that sharing. Thank you all for being here, for your sharing, and for joining in this discussion. Please, if you would like to continue the conversation, we would love to do that with you. We invite you to join us on April 10th for an open session with the Mary Hoch Center for Reconciliation. The link is in the chat, and I really hope to see some of you there to continue on with this work, healing-centered processes and leadership. With that, Melinda sends her thanks. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon.